Hi, and welcome to TheGunBlog.ca. I am Nicholas Johnson, and joining me today is Sheldon Clare, the past president of Canada's National Firearms Association. Hi, Sheldon.
Hello, Nicholas. Glad to be here.
Really glad to have you. And we're going to get into some great and interesting topics about gun culture and gun politics, gun policy, self-defense, where the conversation goes. But the reason I invited you today is because of some topical news that earlier this month, you resigned as president and BC director of the NFA. And I'd like to ask why.
Well, sure. I think there are a number of factors behind my decision to step down from those important roles at this time. First of all, I've been doing this particular position since 2010. It's a little over 11 years now. And it's a stressful thing to be doing. There's a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls. You have to put up with a certain amount of flack from the peanut gallery and your critics out there in the community. And I've been fine with that. I've never been intimidated or had to worry about any of that. But I also felt it was getting to be a time where I put my stamp on things fairly well. And with me staying there and others needing to grow, it would be better for me to step away and let others have more space to be able to put out their own aspects of the NFA's vision as it has developed over the last dozen years or so. So this seemed to be a good time for me to leave. We had our federal election. We did very well with our particular efforts in that election. We have a number of initiatives and things going on in the NFA. I've got a pretty strong crew that I was leaving, very dedicated people who are good at their jobs, and they're very passionate about their work for the NFA. So it seemed to me that it is a good point to leave on a high note when we are doing well, and then I could get some more time to spend a bit of hours out hunting and out at the range, which I did this fall. I actually spent some time out moose hunting. It was successful in harvesting a moose. I've got some designs on a white-tailed deer that I'm going to try looking at this weekend. And it felt to me that I could better enjoy some of my leisure time without always having to pack one of these things around, these cell phones around, always having to be ready for the next call. I feel I've been successful in helping a lot of people or facilitating people getting helped who've run afoul of Canada's torturous gun laws. And it seemed to me that it was time for me to go. Now, certainly from time to time, a board of directors has discussions about various aspects of operations, and occasionally you have disagreements about things. And we have certainly had our disagreements. It's the NFA is not a dictatorship. It never has been. And when you are faced with a board that looks like it can stand on its feet and do its own things without always having to be directed or told how to react or what to do in a particular circumstances, well, that says to me that it's time that I can step away and I can go on and do other things. And I haven't left the NFA. I'm a life member of the National Firearms Association. I believe the NFA is the best bet for Canadian firearms owners. I think there are other options out there which are a big mistake for people to be spending much money on. I think that there are motives in at least one organization that are primarily around fundraising and personal benefit rather than the cause as a whole. And I think the NFA is much more virtuous in that regard and makes sure that the money that comes in gets spent directly on the fight rather than on sensationalizing the fight and trying to make money that I think is not necessarily being used to the best account of the firearms community. And I would recommend that people be vigilant in demanding good information at AGMs from their directors about how money is being spent, what it's being used for, and who's benefiting. I think those are reasonable questions for any member of any organization to ask.
Got that. You've mentioned a bunch of things I want to pick up on in a few minutes, but I want to stick on this. People in the gun rights community and Canada's gun rights community are are talking about you, Sheldon, and I want to give you a chance to answer the questions. The feeling, the perception is that the departure was sudden, that it was announced by Blair Hagan, the now interim president, on November 4th, that he ran the communications. And this common thread seems to be people thinking, oh, geez, internal politics, health issue, personal issue, career, something. I hope it's none of those. But let me just ask you, did you feel pressure from your board to resign just almost 6 months before the next AGM?
No, I didn't feel any pressure from the board to resign. I advised the board I would be resigning actually well before November 4th, and they turned down my resignation. They said they didn't want to accept it, and I went, well, okay, and I offered to stick around for an interim time, and they said, well, okay, well, if you're going to actually go, well, then no, let's make this a clean separation. Then they decided to put Blair in, and I think Rick Igersich is now the vice president of communications. And it's moving forward. Like, I think the thing people need to understand is the organization must be bigger than any one member, must be bigger than any leader, must be bigger than any director or any person. It's a mistake that is commonly made in the firearms community to look for some sort of a messiah who is going to save everyone from the evils of gun control. And that's simply not the case. This has always been about every individual fighting on behalf of themselves by getting involved, supporting the NFA with donations, and supporting our advocacy efforts in order to make the real changes that need to be made. It's not about a Sheldon Clare or a Dave Tomlinson or a Blair Hagan or anyone else being some sort of a paragon of virtue who is going to single-handedly solve the problem. That's simply not the case. So
why didn't the letter of the NFA statement, why wasn't it signed by you? Why was it signed by Blair?
Well, Blair, if Blair's the incoming president, why would the outgoing one sign it? I mean, that's, that makes sense to me, that you're moving forward rather than staying stuck in the past.
Okay. Because I can add some color here. I spoke to a few board members in the past few days preparing for this meeting, and there's incredible solidarity. I spoke to Blair Hagan yesterday by phone. He gave me permission to say this. So I checked with him. Yeah, he gushing with praise. Incredible solidarity. There's no dirt. If there's dirt, no one's sharing it. No, there's.
Why would there be?
No, but it's as a guy who. So also I should say I am an NFA member. The NFA was the first gun org that I joined back in, I think, 2015, and I am. I'm a member currently, but there was, I guess I got the feeling of an incredibly tight ship, incredibly solidarity around the leadership. Of course, there's stuff, but it's what I find is between, say, you or Rod Giltaca or Tony Bernardo, the leaders of the main gun organizations, it's very strong personalities, and I would consider myself also a strong personality, and some people love us and some people hate us.
Well, that's the thing. If you're going to do this kind of job, you have to be able to take a bit of flack. I mean, It's not something where you're going to stand up there and everyone's going to like you. And I think, quite frankly, if you did nothing, you wouldn't have any enemies. And the fact of the matter is, I think my efforts with my team that I've enjoyed working with for so many years, various members have come and gone. I think of a number of them, like Henry Atkinson and Phil Simar, Bill Rance, who's been a treasurer for the organization for a long, long time, and others as well. People like Jim Smith and other folks who made huge contributions to the firearms community over decades. And I mean, I'm walking in the steps of giants when I was doing my job, and I'm flattered people would say kind things about my efforts in there. But I mean, it's a team effort, and it's a matter of having the support for what you're doing in able for that to go forward. And I think that I was looking at a circumstance where we have a strong board of directors, and the fact of the matter is that if I'm there and I've got a strong board, and it's working well, people are skilled, they're capable, they're doing the jobs they need to do, then it's a good time for me to move on. This is a time I've done this for 11 years as president. That's a long pull.
You mentioned the word professionalism at the beginning, and I wonder, when I talk to people, Dave Tomlinson, I guess the founder of the NFA, I wonder if it's fair to characterize NFA as it used to be more personality driven, and it's now in the last 10 years become more of a professional organization. Is that a fair characterization?
Probably. I mean, Dave was a great advocate for the firearms community, and he did what he could with the resources he had. I mean, I was part of that team that worked with Dave Tomlinson. I remember going to meetings where he wasn't allowed in the room, and I had to go in there and be that guy, because Dave was a bit abrasive sometimes, and that didn't sit with many people. But it's certainly the case that it's been my goal as NFA president. When I first was elected, what I set out to do was to build a professional organization with professional branding, a professional structure, a professional office staff that just wasn't gunnies, but was full of people who understood administration and could properly serve the needs of the membership. I wanted to make sure that our magazine was in good shape and a professional document. And we've got a fantastic editor there now in Al Voth, who does a great job in making sure that the magazine is well filled with informative information, which is difficult to do in an internet era when everything is so rapid. And, how do you get articles that are timely and important and have meaning? And people are still reading it. And I think that was essential. And one of the other major changes we made that was ruffled a few feathers, particularly in Western Canada, was to make large overtures to Quebec and French Canada generally, to ensure that there was an ability to provide service in French at our office, to provide some articles, at least in our magazine, in French, to provide an internet and social media presence in French, and to encourage the people in French Canada, particularly in Quebec, to stand up and fight for themselves with our support and help. And that was a big change in what we've been able to achieve in the last 11, 12 years. I think that was a major change.
That is, I guess, so those are some of your major successes. What are some of your things that, I guess, disappointments?
Well, I'm always disappointed when there's a Liberal sitting in the House of Commons as Prime Minister. So that's a disappointment. I mean, I am very pleased that we managed to prevent Mr. Trudeau from gaining a majority government. Yet again, he was held to a minority. He lost some key cabinet seats. The stats we have from our efforts in the election, and I mean, we spent something like $400,000 in pre and post-writ expenses in this election, and I think it was money well spent. Our members want us to do that kind of work, and that's what we did, and we were successful. I mean, we had a major influence in some 17 ridings. We managed to flip 6, and they were by narrow margins. And I know when it's a narrow margin and we put money into those ridings, we made a difference. We got people out to vote. We weren't helped by the Conservatives, unfortunately. Their campaign at a key moment faltered and caused a lot of the firearms community to become going, what the hell? They were confused by the flip-flopping, and that was foolish, and it caused a lot of damage. And I think I was reported in the media at the beginning of November as saying that if you're going to keep throwing people under the bus, you're not going to have anybody riding on it. And that's something that the Conservatives need to really start thinking about as they keep trying to alienate traditional areas of support with a view to trying to chase down illusory votes from people who will never support them, because that's what they've been doing. Happy
to hear that. Yeah, I was, just to provide some context, today we're recording this on Friday, the 19th of November, 2021, and we just had an election in September that in the middle of the election, Erin O'Toole, the Conservative leader, essentially says that he will
reverse the policy in his conservative policy book.
Right. There's a major gun confiscation underway, a mass criminalization of hundreds of thousands of gun owners. And he says that all the current bans will remain in place. And people try to speculate, oh, it's a tactical messaging. He means this or he means that. That's not what he said.
Well, yeah, I think in some respects it was a stupid decision made it off the cuff, and I think that it really showed, from my perspective, that he's probably not the guy to become the Prime Minister of Canada, because if he can't stand on his principles and hold firm with them and argue them, has I know the NFA did. I mean, we were attacked about this guillotine thing, for example, and I'm going, okay, well, if you think I said something illegal, immoral, or fattening, deal with it accordingly. But
do you want to clear up? Do you want to clear up that guillotine thing?
What about it?
Like what? Okay, is there anything to say about that? That was you made a comment in one of your videos,
I did was relay an account that had been mentioned to me about someone saying they need to sharpen up their woodworking and metalworking skills, and they were referring, of course, to the 1789 French Revolutionary Committee of Public Safety and its extensive use of the guillotine, and this got taken by certain liberals as being a threat or something to them. They got to understand that they have. The problem is people don't understand or follow history. They don't look at. They don't have any historical context. They don't think about things in a critical or analytical way, and so they just try to go out there and take a simple smear, and that's what happened with that.
And it's I'm also getting a lesson right now as I hear you say that sometimes it's not always a blessing to be too smart or to have too much information, because you have context around that the anti-gun fanatic didn't have. But I guess the problem is the approach. The approach is not, hey, what do you mean by that? I found that hurtful or whatever. They immediately attack you.
I don't care if they find anything hurtful. You see, this is the thing is, I try to base my approach, or I've always based my approach on data, facts, statistical analysis, critical analysis, not emotion. The emotional arguments don't wash with me. If you want to try to argue emotionally, I mean, there's some in the gun community have declined to debate me because they knew that my approach was not going to be one that was in sync with their own. So I've had set up interviews where, this particular person from the anti-gun side of things is going to say this and this, and what's your reaction? And I would just say, well, the stats are this. and so that terminates the interview because they don't want to discuss the facts.
Why do you think the gun debate is so nasty?
Well, it's nasty because it represents a fundamental ideological difference. If you either believe in individual rights and freedom, or you believe in being scared and you trust everything the government does, and you think that that's the answer to all your problems. And I am in that group that is a critical thinker. I don't believe that you can trust the government on all things. I like to hear what they say and then look at that critically. I don't think that it's responsible for citizens to just go along with whatever the government says in all things. I think that we need an opposition in this country that takes the government to task on everything they do, rather than attempt to try to pander to votes of people who are never going to support them and throw those who would under the bus.
So I'm going to make an assertion, and I'd like you to say agree or disagree, that one of the things that holds us back, whether it's NFA, CCFR, CSSA, or any other gun organization, is that it caters mostly to conservatives and libertarians and pretty much leaves out anybody who votes NDP or liberal. True or false?
Well, it's not a true or false question. Okay. Part of the problem is, although lots of people who tend to support NDP, you will find there are a lot of hunters in that group. You will also see there is a fair bit of division in the firearms community about all sorts of aspects. There are some in the firearms community who think licensing is a great thing and it's a panacea and it's a wonder. The NFA does not support licensing. It views it as the origin of part of the problem, why we're in the circumstance we're in with all sorts of firearms being subjected to seizure. That's a problem, and that problem originates from licensing and registration. It originates from classifying firearms. The three stools of failed gun control policies.
And I totally agree, but I'm also, I would consider myself a civil libertarian, but I guess my concern is, or the statement was meant to, yes, of course, gun owners are across the spectrum, far left, far right, moderate, center, authoritarians, libertarians, communists, capitalists, everybody.
Sure.
We all own guns, but the main organizations seem to cater to I'll call them the right wing, the conservatives and libertarians.
Well, I think it's because of the political reality of who wants to take away your guns. In this country right now, there are no gun-friendly parties.
Right. Okay.
There are none, absolutely none, and I include all of them in that.
As we just discovered 2 months ago in the conservatives, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean. And I'm talking about minor parties and everything else. There's very, very few options that really meet everybody's needs, and that are electable as well as the other factors. So when you're looking at that, and you're looking at the way the world is right now with this ongoing pandemic, you see a tendency towards fear ruling people's decisions, and this is a terrible opportunity for statists to be in the ascendancy. And I think that's one of the most dangerous circumstances that we could ever have. And I'm very, very concerned at the direction this country is going in right now. I'm very concerned the direction the world is going in with regards to statist type behaviors. I mean, you look at what's going on in places like Australia or Austria or New Zealand or France. Even Switzerland's got riots in the street, which you're not seeing brought forward on the major news sources. I mean, I was surprised today to see Kyle Rittenhouse's not guilty verdict actually making the news on the state media like the CBC, because this is not the verdict that a lot of the woke left agenda wants. And so when you ask as to why firearms organizations, and I don't speak for any firearms organization right now, tends to cater to the conservative or libertarian type of view, it's because those are the people that seem to get it. The socialist left generally does not want the average citizen to own firearms, and that's the liberal bend on things. They just don't want that, and so politically, they're not our friends at all. They're our enemies. Now, the conservatives made themselves not to be our friends, but they also aren't our enemies, and they have done some positive things, such as the removal of the long gun registry under the Harper government. That was a major move of the ratchet the other way, which should never have had. It's massive. It's actually prevented them from engaging in the whole scale confiscation regime that they really want to do.
Yeah, I don't want to stay on this for too long, but I guess I'm baffled by people who in Canada, Canadians, who support their right to own firearms and who vote Liberal or NDP or Bloc Québécois, or who vote for a party that has an overt and deliberate confiscation platform. That to me is weird. And I even know of one of my readers that voted Liberal in the 2019 election after Trudeau said he's planning these mass criminalizations and confiscations, and now he's in court to keep his guns. So it's like, what?
Yeah, well, see, the firearms issue is what I call an indicator issue.
Yeah.
Because if they want to take away your guns, what else do they want to take away? Right? I mean, there are a lot of parallels to other issues that are contemporary. I mean, the whole idea of vaccine passports, for example, that sort of thing, are to me extremely frightening. Like, what are we doing here? This is creating wedges in society. This is your papers, please society, and this is a direct attempt to limit people's freedoms and to isolate people. This is not Canada. This is not a Western democracy. This is statist behavior, and it is frightening, and it should not be tolerated, regardless of what the justification for it is.
And I guess I agree with that sentiment. I'm also aware that there are many gun owners in Canada and around the world, but in Canada, who don't, and who maybe are statists. And I'm thinking of Marxists who, I guess, if we were having this conversation 100 years ago, it would be the Marxists want their AKs didn't exist. They want their Mosins for the great proletarian revolution, and they would have been fighting for the gun rights.
And I have talked to people like that even in the last year, are in that sort of bend, and you know their reason for supporting firearms rights is completely different than yours or mine, perhaps. So
what would be their reason?
Interesting. Well, their reasons, of course, are like you said, the great proletarian revolution. There's still people out there who are on that kind of a bend.
Are they going to turn in their firearms when Mr. Trudeau?
Of course they will.
That's
usually the focal point of the conversation. And I don't think most Canadians are going to turn in those firearms. I think there will be tremendous resistance, much more than there was in the 90s with C-68 and with Kim Campbell's gun grab in C-17. I think the resistance will be high. And it was also high back in the 1978 legislation, C-51. Most people didn't register their AR-15s back in those days.
What's the feedback from your membership? I can tell you, before you answer that, I'll just tell you of my members, not one person has said they plan to surrender their freedoms or their property. It's quite the opposite. They're quite adamant, saying, "I will not."
Well, I that's the sentiment I've been getting as well. And I think when you're living in a society, as I am in British Columbia, where the grocery shelves are empty, where the roads and infrastructure are breaking down, where flooding and disaster are limiting the logistical supply chain's ability to move people and product around, where rail access and road access out of the Lower Mainland has been severed and is in process of being repaired. We're all hopeful that happens. Why would anyone give up their guns? Like, why would anyone even think that was a good idea? I know people who've never owned guns who've contacted me in the last week or so, in the last few days, and said, "Well, Sheldon, how do I get a gun? I'm a little concerned. I was at the grocery store and the entire produce section was empty. The only thing left were lemons and limes." Yeah. I said, "Well, grab some of those so you don't get scurvy," right? But it's a scary time for a whole bunch of reasons. You've got civil unrest everywhere. You have an economy that's in a tipping point. We're about to see runaway inflation. We've seen excess spending, which always leads to that. I mean, somebody needs to take an economics macro and micro course and realize what is going to happen in the next little while to this economy. Mr. Trudeau has got a lot to be answering people for. He is responsible for what has happened to this country, and what is about to happen to this country is dire indeed.
I've got also strong political opinions, but I want to keep us focused. I want to keep this channel focused on the gun issue. And I want to also share an anecdote to ratify what you've just said, which is when in the early days of COVID-19, when the concerns spiked right in March of 2020, my article on how to buy a handgun, readership through the roof, page views through the roof. And of course we had gun store after gun store after gun store across the country saying they're sold out, they're getting cleaned out, not only because of COVID scare, but the spike was when people are afraid of the world coming to an end because of a crazy pandemic or mass flooding, or you can't get food elsewhere. Yeah.
Or the reaction to it. It's not so much the pandemics that's the problem. It's what governments are doing with their inconsistent and stupid activities that are dividing people.
Economic collapse or mass unemployment or And
I've never been a conspiracy theorist, but when you know people who are, and they're going around saying, "See, I told you," it's a little bit disconcerting.
Yeah, and also just for context here, you are a history professor, so you look at this with a different eye than people who haven't studied history.
I do, and I think people often say, well, history repeats itself. Well, history doesn't really repeat itself, but there are patterns and there are trends and there are bad decisions that do repeat. And I think it behoves people to crack a book every now and then and read some history and look at the context in which bad decisions are being made and try to avoid making similar bad decisions in their own times. And so a little bit of historical context is a very good thing.
Just change tacks here. You joined the NFA in your mid-20s, I guess, as a volunteer. So you've been president. You've been. So that's more than 30 years, I guess. Close to.
I started, I think, in about 1987. I was active with the Reform Association of Canada, which became the Reform Party of Canada. And I met Dave Tomlinson at the 1987 Reform Convention. I was a member at that time when I met him. And I think the NFA probably had 2,000 members in those days. Maybe
how many members today?
We're sitting at around 70 or so thousand. I don't know. I'm not on the pulse of that anymore. But with fluctuations and different membership styles,
there's two classes of membership. Is that the right way to say it? The people who join there's like the insurance thing. Am I right about that? There's two types of membership.
There's a number of different categories. We have life members and we have business members and we have ordinary or regular members, and we have associate members, our club members. And clubs have two kinds of members. There are either clubs with full membership in the NFA for each member, and they get the magazine and all the benefits thereof and can vote. And then you have clubs which are have a membership in which they pay a fee for all their members and they're insured, but each member of the club does not get all of the full benefits of the magazine and so on. And that's the two basic categories of membership.
And the 70,000 would be the I'll call them full members.
That's all in.
Everyone all in. Okay.
Yeah, all in. Yeah. I think it's disappointing. And I mean, you see different firearms groups grubbing for about 3%. 4% of the firearms community, when we have a firearms owning community in this country of between 5 and 7 million people.
You think it's that high?
Oh, yes.
I thought it would be 3-4 million at this point.
Well, you have about 2 million people with possession acquisition licenses, but they're the minority. There's the suckers, right? Like you and me.
Like me, yeah.
Yeah. And then you have the millions of other people who own firearms or have them in their possession and have never bothered to get a license, don't even know they need one for the most part. And for the most part, have never heard of the National Firearms Association or any other organization. And they're just basically, maybe kind of aware there might be a local gun club. And there's a huge opportunity there if one could market to it to get that great unwashed involved. But many of them won't join because they don't want to be on a list or they don't want to be associated with an organization that could be targeted by government for whatever reason. And this is a time where government is very much targeting organizations and individuals that are not in sync with its message.
I'm going to just put a plug for, I'm very aware of that concern, and it's a concern of mine too. And for my subscribers, for anybody who's thinking of subscribing or donating to TheGunBlog.ca, which of course I encourage you to do, I don't ask for your name, your address, your postal code. I don't ask for any personal identification. I don't know who any of my members are. All I need is an email. I don't even see your credit card. I see the last 4 digits, but email anyway. So I'm very sensitive and I take great steps for privacy. I don't know. A question also to follow up your point, what kind of person should join the NFA? What kind of person would be happy joining the NFA?
Well, I want to say, first off, you don't need to be a firearms owner to join and support the NFA. And we have lots of members who are not firearms owners, but merely support the principles we espouse. And there, to put a plug in, you can join the NFA at NFA.ca, join today. And they're happy to sign you up either on the phone or online, or used to be in person at a gun show or something like that, if that ever happens again. But anybody should join the National Firearms Association. If you support freedom, if you support liberty, if you support the right of people to be able to defend themselves from whatever source an attack might come, then you should join the NFA, because that is the organization that espouses those views. That is the organization that is against gun control. We understand what it means to be on a list, to have a license, to have your firearms registered. And if anybody had any doubts about that, you just have to look at these confiscation orders in council and how they will be targeted at people, and how you're going to get a letter at some point telling you to turn in your stuff. And then you're going to have to make some decisions. And everybody wants to think they're that guy that is going to stand up against tyranny while everyone else has got their arm up, making the salute. And you know what? It's a hard thing to do. But just make sure that you can stick with your courage of conviction and you don't back down, because when you back down, the bad guys win.
Another question about NFA: where does the money go? The membership. When I'm a member, I think I pay $45 a year, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, it goes to fight bad gun control. I mean, it's done things like, for example, send myself or others off to meetings around the world to link up with other organizations, such as our membership in the World Forum on the Future of Shooting Activities. It's a group of like-minded manufacturers groups, users groups, and so on, that get together and share information. For example, we've been working on the lead issue in ammunition. It's a big one. We've gone to the United Nations and stood up against the tyrants there. I've taken great pleasure in calling them out at United Nations meeting. If you think that I'm hated in some areas of the anti-gun movement or others in Canada, I'll tell you, I'm very, very unpopular when I go to United Nations meetings and call out the tyrants. And I've done that on a few occasions. And I know that my team there that I've mentored in NFA on the board of directors, that there are people there who are capable of doing that as well. So I sleep easy knowing that. So our money goes to that. Our money, as I told you earlier, we spent something like $400,000 in pre and post writ spending on the last federal election. Member services is a big part of where our money goes. In and out is our insurance, of course. When people have insurance, that money goes to the insurance company. We spend our money on advocacy and making sure that those who are doing the advocacy are well supported in what they're doing. So we don't spend it on fancy frills. Or so you don't fees or bang buses or anything like that.
Or your second pool.
No, there's okay. That's another thing. The NFA directors are volunteers. They're not paid. There's a stipend which is paid to the president. That I would get a small stipend on a monthly basis, which was basically the compensation for my time when I have to answer the phone at 2 a.m, or when I'm up at 6 dealing with all the emails that I would be getting in that role. And I mean, that's 11 years of that, right? And,
what was your toughest period as president?
The toughest period as president, I think probably the most difficult point would have been in the 2015 time. This is a time in which I had committed for 5 years when I was elected in 2010. I said I'd stick around for 5 years and do this, and then someone else could do it. And I worked at building a good team, building on the professionalism goals I had. We'd hired a lobbyist who I mistakenly thought was going to be a boon to us. And I unfortunately had to take steps to remove that person. And this caused a great furore for a good period of time. And I remember going to the Quebec AGM, and there was a lot of yelling and screaming and personal attacks directed at me and other directors, accusations that were being made about malfeasance and so on, none of which were true, and all of which were based on rumor mongering and attempts to attack my personal credibility and that of others. And some people probably would have cut and run at that point. And I mean, I had a speech in my pocket, which was my speech telling everybody about what a great job we were all doing, and how I had planned to step down that fall. And I saw this crazy behavior from some individuals, and some of them are involved in another organization now. And I looked at this and I said, well, I guess it's not the time to leave. I think I need to stay around and make sure this is fixed. And so that's been a few years since then, and it's been 11 years as president. Now that's a long enough pull.
Looking back, so I remember that period. I started the Gun Blog in January of 2015, and
Yes.
so that would have been, I guess, in the spring. Or I remember the incidents you're talking about.
Yes.
And
yeah, that was a difficult time. I mean, my marriage suffered because of that, and I ended up getting divorced because for that and other reasons which don't need to be out here. But that was a very difficult time for me personally. I remember I had wrist surgery. I showed up at that AGM in Quebec with a cast on my arm, and I've been sitting there thinking, wow, what have I got myself into here? This is
so
just
why
one
not
thing
bail?
after another.
Why not cut and run and say, look, I was happy to take the presidency, but I didn't sign up for this. I'm out.
Well, I've never run from a fight in my life, and I wasn't about to start then. Someone wants, I'm that guy when someone wants to run an attack on me. I'm the guy who gets more belts for the machine gun. I'm the guy will fill the sandbags. I'll put up the wire and make sure the hole's deeper and everybody's better situated to fight it. Because I'm not, if I'm not going to run away in the face of an attack.
And also, you were a reservist for 20-ish years.
I was a cadet instructors list officer for most of the 1980s, and I went on sup list at the end of the 80s. I was looking at going into the regular Army as an infantry officer, and I went to Gagetown for Combat Arms Selection Board and was told that there was this thing called the Forces Reduction Plan and that they weren't taking anybody in combat arms at that time. So I was offered a position in the Air Force, and I turned it down. And I went into post-secondary, where I went into K to 12 teaching for a few years. And then I went into post-secondary education. And I've been at the College of New Caledonia since 1992.
And to me, that's really interesting because the only side of you that I see is the NFA side. I don't know. I don't see the side of you that's your husband, a father, a reservist, a bagpiper, a teacher. I'm sure there's a lot. I mean, you're a rich life, and we forget that the people we're dealing with here, we may see them only in one context, but that's not all that they do.
And that's a very good point, Nicholas. That people are complex, and I mean, we do engage in a lot of other activities in our lives. I'm active with my Legion. I was a parade marshal for our recent Remembrance Day parade. I was up at 7:30 getting rid of graffiti on the rails of the branch of the Legion and cleaning up junk on the steps, making sure the cenotaph was in good shape for the ceremony, and doing my best to make sure that there weren't any incidents or problems in our Remembrance Day in Prince George, BC, which there were not. And I had a minor role to play there with another good team. And we had groups like Team Rubicon helping out. We usually have a good presence from the local reserve unit, and they were there, as well as the fire and emergency rescue. And the RCMP were also fantastic. They played a key role in the success of our services there. So that's another thing I've done. I'm active with Biathlon British Columbia. I was on the board of directors for Biathlon BC for a while, and I'm a qualified biathlon technical delegate, which means I can oversee a biathlon event anywhere in Canada, and I can be the senior official at those events. My daughters were both in biathlon for a number of years. They've moved on to other things. The youngest is in volleyball in a big way, and the oldest is graduated from high school and trying to spread her wings and do what she can do. So yeah, there's a lot going on.
You're not just you're not just, well, at the time, the president of the NFA. You much more. You spoke earlier about how you shaped the NFA. I want to ask how the NFA shaped you.
Well,
the presidency, in particular, the presidency.
And I mean, when you're the president, you lay out a vision. I don't know that I shaped the NFA. I think there were a number of people who had input into what the NFA has become at this time. Blair Hagan has done a stalwart service in his many years, and then from him getting involved in the 90s and forward, in his time as national president before me, and that now back in the seat again. What has the NFA done to shape me? Well, it's made me have a better understanding of Canada. I've taken the opportunity to meet with a lot of Canadians in different parts of this country, and I think that's helped me grow both professionally as a historian, as a person, to see our country in the light of what it has been and has become, and to meet with Canadians and understand what we have that is common, as well as what makes each of us from our different areas different from each other. And what also I found common is I've met some of the greatest people in the world in the firearms community. Like you could be at a gun show and you need to go to the washroom, and you just say to the guy at the next table or someone you've been talking to, "Hey, can you watch my table for a few minutes?" You might have thousands of dollars worth of gear on some of the table, and you know that is not going to be a problem. Like you can be completely confident about that, because gun people are good people for the most part. There's always a bad apple in these things, of course, but for the most part, you can trust them.
Is it better to be getting into, if you, let's say someone who doesn't own guns today, you joined the NFA in 1987. Is it, I want to say this, is the outlook for someone getting into guns better then or today?
Well, I think when I first became a firearms owner, when I was about, I'd be 13 or 14 when that was legal.
So you became an instructor when you were 13 or 14?
No, a firearms owner.
A firearms owner, okay.
Yeah, I became an instructor in the cadet program when I was about 14 or 15. And I'm teaching on the FN rifle and the sport codes and the anshoots and the number 7 Lee Enfield 22s, as well as the number 4 303s. I cut my teeth on all of that. But at the same time, is it a good time to get involved and get a firearm? Of course it is. I think it's an essential time to get involved and get a firearm. It's especially important to get into handguns, rifles, get into hunting, get into all of it. Like I like all kinds of shooting. I like shooting trap. I like shooting skeet. I like shooting long distance rifle. I like shooting IPSC. I was an IPSC range officer and competitor in the early 90s for a time. I still have my black badge somewhere with the little B zone on the top of it, which you can't have anymore because of various decisions that have been made over time. But I've been involved in lots of kind of shooting. And like I say, when I go moose hunting, once I've got my primary tag filled and my freezer's needs are met, I usually go out and hunt with my black powder smoke pole, because the pressure's off and I can take that out and give my old Baker rifle a good run for its money. 62 grain ball is going to stop pretty much anything. So
it's interesting though, we do have a flourishing. Some parts of the gun industry, of the gun culture, are flourishing. Other parts are getting shut down.
And that's a political and ideological problem that we need to deal with. Like we were saying earlier, Nicholas, people aren't going to give up their guns, and they shouldn't give up their guns. They should absolutely not give up their guns. And when the government says, give up your guns, they need to say no. And they're going to have a problem with that. And they're going to make a few examples of a few people. Maybe they'll make an example of me. But I'll tell you, they're not getting anything from me. They can go screw themselves. And that's where I'm at with it. Good.
I also don't intend to hand over anything.
Nope. And I think as long as we all stay together, we're going to be fine.
So I want to do a separate video about this, because that's to me is a huge topic. That we're talking about the mass confiscation, mass criminalization orders that came in May 2020. A complete mess, completely unenforceable. It's a big hot mess. And yes. So if nobody turns in their stuff, there's nothing can be done about it.
Look at the example.
But you do risk, every individual does run the risk of a SWAT raid and getting.
Well, you look at what happened to this gunsmith in Ontario recently, and we don't know all the details or what happened or why, but it's pretty sketchy that an emergency response team comes to a place 150 kilometers out of their jurisdiction to serve a warrant, which no one's ever seen.
Let's get to that in just a second. You're talking about Roger Kotanko in Fort Dover, Ontario. But just to stay on the mass criminalization, if someone's saying, okay, these orders in council that put us outside the law and are ordering us to surrender our rifles and shotguns, unenforceable, big hot mess, no money, no police don't want to do it. Nobody wants to turn in their stuff, and nobody wants to take our stuff. And so you have, on the one hand, this thing is strongly suggests just hold steady, don't do a thing. And on the other hand, we do risk criminal charges, SWAT raids, confiscations, in jail.
Yes.
So what do you say to someone who's weighing that up? The risk of nothing's going to happen, and the risk of I'll take a bullet in the head.
I think you look at the example that the good people, the firearms owners of Quebec have set in saying no to the current administrative type law with fines and so on that they're facing. It's not being supported, and it's an embarrassment.
Well, if all you get is if the only penalty was a fine, I'd take it.
Yeah,
I'm concerned the penalty is going to be.
It's a bigger risk.
Yeah,
and I think you have to be upfront with people about that. There is a risk of being a criminal, but I mean, what's happening in this country right now is almost akin to statist oppression. And I know where I fit if it's 1933, and they're trying to break people and segregate them and divide them. I know where I sit, and I know what my decisions are in that case. And I think people need to all look in the mirror and answer that question for themselves. And they need to understand they're not alone. There are lots of people who feel exactly as they do, but they need to not be intimidated. They need to stop being afraid, and they need to think for themselves, and they need to be willing to take any action that's necessary to stand up for themselves and in the face of statist tyranny. Because if this is where this country's going, we have a huge problem. And if there's no political solution to our problems, then that leads to a very scary path, which people may well be forced to tread.
So I want to engage with that for a second, because I'm going to make it a little bit exaggerate here, but when I hear people say, "Oh my God, the Germans are coming," and seeming to this is not what you're doing, but some people would equate.
Well, I married a German, so
the 1930s in Europe with the current time in North America, and there are perhaps some similarities in terms of ideological whatever that is, but it's also very different. So provide some context around that.
Well,
my eyes roll when I hear people say the Germans are coming.
I didn't say anything about the Germans.
Okay,
I said the 1930s.
The 1930s,
and I mean, you can point to all kinds of examples. You can point to Franco in Spain, who was ultimately successful in his civil war. You have Mussolini, who starts out as a socialist editor of a newspaper and parlays that into his black shirt fascists, who are pro-monarchy and yet have a very strong agenda of control and all the rest of that, and nationalist glory, but which is not in line with socialist sentiments. And then you look at the other minor powers throughout Europe, which are also looking for solutions to big problems. And all of their solutions come up as statist ones. They all went statist. And Germany is one of those examples that went and did that as well, with its German National Socialist Workers' Party platform, which has got a number of elements which one could clearly see as socialist, and others which are strongly nationalist, and which makes it a very unique offering, and yet something that incorporates also the need to have a scapegoat to blame on that country's ills, which is what they did. And you see that very strongly in the German and the minor powers examples, but it's also present in the other ones as well.
Do you see that happening today in Canada, though?
Well, I think we have been given scapegoats in this country already. If you look at for example, the pandemic and how people are being divided by being vaccinated or not vaccinated, that's very, very clearly a scapegoat. I've heard the term, it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Well, this is very clearly an attempt to denigrate, segregate, identify, and punish people who are not on the program. That's a scapegoat. That's what that is. It isn't anything else.
Okay, so I guess I'm understanding better what the parallel you're drawing. I'm also thinking that a very big difference between 1930 30s Europe and today is you have lots of dudes and guys and girls, men and women and whoever else with an iPhone and a microphone like me, who can reach the world either in support of the statist regime or in opposition to the statist ideological regime.
That's partially
so
correct.
That's a very important difference. I guess I'm thinking if we're asking if freedom is on the way up or on the way down, I think freedom is declining. And also you have this slight, the contrarian view, you have anyone with an iPhone and a microphone, anyone with an iPhone has can reach the world. So can provide that ideological diversity.
But that's also stifled, right? There's a fair bit of control over that on various platforms about how messages can be put out. That's true, yeah. And I mean, I spend a good time every week blocking fact checkers. Right. And this is what's kept me, I think, from getting banned off social media is I go on a weekly basis and I look for anything that says fact checker, fact checkers or anything like that. I block and ban them, all of them. I don't care what their stated ideology or anything is. I know from research, which is what my graduate degree has trained me to do, what I can accept, I can get away with and what I can't. I also accept that social media is a poison pit and people will say outrageous things to try to get attention. I've done that myself. And I think you, Nicholas, you could probably even say you pushed the envelope a bit on that as well.
And then ended up quitting Twitter and stuff because of
Twitter's a waste of time. I have no use for Twitter.
I want to bring this back to guns though, because I'm well, actually, at the AGM, I was at the AGM, the NFA AGM a few years ago, and Blair Hagan said something. I tweeted it. We were talking about Twitter. I tweeted it. The quote was to the effect of, you cannot be a gun owner in Canada without being politically engaged and politically active.
Right.
And I did get politically engaged and politically active for a number of years. And with the conversation we've just been having about ideological conformity and scapegoating and dividing, I'm now questioning that and wondering if bringing the politics into the gun stuff turns a lot of people off.
I think bringing the politics into the gun stuff is essential. If you are not involved in politics, you will be governed by those who are. That's the bottom line. And that is what is happening here, is that as successive groups of firearms owners have given up their franchise, decided to stay home and not vote and so on, as they did for Kim Campbell back in the early 90s.
Kim Campbell, who was a conservative prime minister of Canada in the early 90s, who passed some of the worst anti-freedom legislation for gun
Absolutely.
owners.
Her Bill C-17 and the earlier incarnation Bill C-80 were the seeds of what we are all living with now. And it was draconian, it's offensive, and a completely unacceptable legislation that she brought in.
I didn't mean to derail, just provide context on who Kim Campbell was.
Yeah. So you've got to understand that being involved in politics is essential. I mean, I campaigned vigorously to make sure people defeated Kim Campbell. I personally got on the phone and called people. We didn't have iPhones or Facebook or anything. And it's not good enough to just be on these things and tweeting out stuff or posting messages.
No, that's useless.
It's not enough. It's great as a communications tool. I mean, the ability to engage in getting people motivated and out there and so on is fine, but that can all get shut down very quickly.
Also,
legislation is designed to do that.
I'm going to share a different opinion with that. I think these anonymous people with fake profiles or whatever weird names on Twitter or Facebook saying stuff I think it's a waste of time. It's actually worse than useless because they think they're doing something useful, but they're not. No one pays any attention to some faceless.
I agree with you. And I could say the same things about some of the rallies, like when we had the big rallies in the 90s, and I organized about 3 of them. I was actively involved with getting people to come out to that were big ones. And then there were the really big ones, the Fed Up 1 and Fed Up 2 that folks organized in Ottawa. And the problem with those is they were a catharsis. Everybody showed up, they walked around for an hour or two with a sign, listened to a couple of speeches, and they all went home thinking they'd done something. And what really needed to happen was that needed to be the beginning of something, not the end of it. Right. And the idea that you've gone to this and you've made it that was your thing, that was your high point. Well, that's a mistake. Yeah, and I mean, I was in an MP's office when there was a rally going on outside in Ottawa, and we looked out the window, and I said, "Whoa, look at all those people! What's that?" He goes, "That doesn't matter. We get protests all the time. Nobody pays any attention." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I
Same
got the
thing.
same message from senators and other members of parliament that I was meeting with in those 2 days.
So I'd like to let's dig. I'd just like to dig deeper here for a minute on this. What if we stopped paying attention to that the people who are doing the politics, the people who are, I'm going to say, who are the clowns, I'll say the clowns in Ottawa, the people who are playing politics and playing the political game. I ran as a candidate, so I understand that some people want to do that. I wanted to do that. What if we stopped paying attention to them and let our licenses lapse and not pay attention to whatever we get in the mail and buy our guns on the free market instead of the regulated market? What if we started going, what if more of us honest guys, honest people started going that way and essentially stopped paying attention to the political game?
I think if you started to do that under the regime we're in, you're gonna have a need to make sure you've got all of your property carefully sequestered away where the state doesn't have access to it. Because otherwise the state will show up and start to go after you. And I know people who have had that happen to them.
Okay.
I've assisted.
I want to go deep into this. I'm hesitating because I also know we've been talking for about an hour, and this could be a day-long conference on its own.
Absolutely, it could.
What other topics are top of mind for you these days?
Well, today the acquittal of Kyle Rittenhouse, the American hero who was dealing with armed rioters and thugs and successfully defended himself with his modern sporting rifle, I think is one of the big news stories today. I think that's a great thing. And I think kudos to Mr. Rittenhouse and his defense team and to the jury, which so carefully and thoughtfully went through all of the evidence and came up with, I believe, what was the right decision.
So a success, one of the potentially rare times when the legal system actually resulted in justice.
Well, I don't think it's rare that the legal system results in justice. I think what's rare is that it sometimes has a problem in getting justice for firearms owners in this country anyway. And I think that there's probably a huge gnashing of teeth and rending of garments in the woke political left in this country over that particular decision, because they know that gives us as Canadians, who are children of the same legal heritage as the Americans are, a bit of an impetus to fight even more strongly for self-defense as a right that we should not have to be pandering to get somebody to write law about. We should just be able to do it.
And this was a case, the Kyle Rittenhouse case is a case that's just, I guess the verdict was delivered today in Wisconsin, I believe. Is that right?
Kenosha, Wisconsin. Yes.
Kenosha, yeah. And based
Judge
on riots.
Schroeder presiding.
And the self-defense, I'm a proponent of personal self-defense and so forth. What people have told me, though, I've heard people say, oh, that, the Canadians don't care about self-defense, which is absurd.
Nonsense.
It's one of the primary reasons people buy firearms. So how do you handle that?
It is one of the primary reasons people buy firearms. Hunting in Canada is a huge thing, but the reason most people have firearms is not for just one reason.
Right.
They see a firearm as a tool. If over here you're going to pound a stake in, and maybe over here you're going to hit a nail. Well, a firearm has multiple uses, and people want to be able to use firearms for multiple uses. Some people collect them. Some people engage in reenactment. Some people like to engage in sports shooting competitions. Some people have all sorts of different shooting competitions they like, and others like to hunt. And pretty much every one of them will use firearms for self-defense. I know of a biathlon athlete who was one of our sponsored athletes until he left that program, who used his biathlon rifle to arrest and apprehend a person who was breaking into cars. And he was very concerned.
Aren't biathlon rifles they don't look like the type of thing you'd use for that purpose.
It's a 22 target rifle, right? Intended for use out in inclement weather. So he used his biathlon rifle to help in the apprehension of a criminal. And he was worried that he was going to get in trouble for this.
And what happened?
To him, nothing. The other party was arrested and dealt with in the justice system.
Okay, good to hear.
Yeah. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, somebody who does that should get a medal, not be subject to ridicule or fear of prosecution because of our laws, which have been abused and misused by successive ideological, what would be the right word, do-gooders or fools who have woke left-wing agendas to try to change society, and not for the better.
It's a really, I think of that sometimes, often actually, this weird cultural moment we're in where we celebrate victims, we essentially glorify the perpetrator, and we don't at all pay any attention to the person who stopped the perpetrator.
Yes, or the people who have been attacked by the perpetrator and who have suffered as a result of it. I mean, I remember an argument I had with a firearms officer many, many years ago about self-defense. And he said, well, someone breaking into your house shouldn't be suffering the death penalty because they break into your house. And I said, yeah, well, getting your house broken into can lead to a death penalty for the person whose house it is. If you don't know what is coming through the door, you don't know what their goals and their intents or their aims are. All you know is that this is your castle and it's your home, and the state isn't allowed to cross that threshold, and neither should some thug.
As a father, I'm a new father, and
congratulations.
Thank you very much. It's an incredible experience.
It's a huge responsibility,
and a very different. It really changed how I think about that. And when there's if someone's prowling around the property or is inside the house, anyway. You want to do what's necessary to protect the people you love.
Yes, exactly. And you should not have any need to
justify
do anything that isn't necessary. You do what's reasonable and necessary in the circumstances you're facing.
And I think my personal view of, sorry, yes, you were saying your friend?
Chris Young in Montreal, who's taught that self-defense stuff for many years, has been a big proponent of that.
And also, I don't know if he's related to, is it Dave Young?
Oh, pardon me, Dave.
Dave Young, yeah.
Dave Young, yes, Dave Young. Sorry about that, Dave.
Dave Young, very important voice in the Canadian self-defense community.
Absolutely. His stuff is very good. And it's a shame how he's been, having to be defending his ability to speak on this, and how the government has tried to shut down his efforts because they don't agree with
that. Was one of the early articles I wrote at TheGunBlog.ca was about the CFO's letter to Dave Young and the response. I think that was about the one I'm thinking of is about 5 years ago. I don't know what's happening today.
Yeah.
Sheldon, there is so much we could talk about. I'd like to start winding down, though, unless there's any other thing that you would like to say to people that's on your mind that you feel we haven't covered, or that you want to clarify or expand on.
Well, I think people need to pay attention to what's going on. I think they need to be vigilant. They shouldn't let things go on like what's happened to this gunsmith in Ontario at Port Dover. They need to be attuned to politics. It does matter who you vote for. It does matter that you vote, and it really does matter that you get involved. You got to make sure you have your firearms. Keep your firearms. Never give them up. Don't let anyone tell you you should, and don't ever get led down the path of statists.
That'll be the last word for today. Thank you very much, Sheldon. The Sheldon Clare, the past president of Canada's National Firearms Association. I really appreciate that you joined me today.
Always a pleasure, Nicholas. Anytime.
And I'd like to thank everybody who watched this interview, and a special thanks to all the supporters and subscribers of TheGunBlog.ca. See you on the next one.